Yes, people need legal status, of course, to remain in Canada. Yes, permanent residence is not guaranteed, but we should also ask whether Canada's international education system has always communicated those realities clearly enough. And we should ask whether students who genuinely relied on information provided by institutions or recruiters deserve a fair examination of their individual circumstances. First, my disclaimer. I am not an immigration consultant. Neither am I a legal advisor. Whatever I'm saying, I just have a personal opinion about the news headline. So please, if you need legal advice, kindly reach out to a legal advisor or to the IRCC website, or perhaps to an immigration consultant. Thank you. Imagine this. You leave your country, you pay international tuition, you travel thousands of kilometers to Canada, you study, you graduate, and then, after completing your program, you discover that the work permit you expected may not be available to you. You protest, you ask questions, and then the Premier of Alberta says you need to go home. That is essentially the message Alberta Premiere Danielle Smith delivered when asked about international students connected to the Portage College controversy whose immigration status has expired and who do not have permanent residency. My name is MJ and I welcome you to the OY Show. If this is your first time, please do well and subscribe to my channel. Like and share this video. Now, here is the question I think we need to ask. Is this simply a case of international students refusing to follow Canada's immigration rules? Or is there a much bigger story here? Because there are actually several different issues happening at the same time. There's the responsibility of an international student to maintain legal status. There is the responsibility of a college to accurately explain its programs and immigration implications. And there is the federal government's responsibility for immigration policy and the post-graduation work permits program. There is also the question that many immigrants and former international students are actually asking. What happens when the rules, expectations, or interpretations of a program change after someone has already, invested years of their life and significant amounts of money? I mean, huge amount of money. Today, we are going to slow the story down. No shouting, no political team sports, no immigrants versus Canadians, and of course, no assumption that either side has the entire story. As an immigrant and someone who has experienced the international student joining myself, I believe we can defend the integrity of Canada's immigration system and still ask whether people were treated fairly. So let's talk about what actually happened. Let's start with the statement that has generated so much attention. On the 29th of July, Alberta Premiere Danielle Smith was asked about international students connected to the Portage College situation. The students had been protesting after post-graduation work permit applications were refused, and Smith said that international students come to Canada on a temporary basis. Her position was essentially that if someone comes to Canada as an international student, their temporary status expires and they haven't obtained permanent residency or another legal basis to remain, they need to leave Canada. She also made an important qualification. So Premier Smith said that if these graduates have skills Alberta needs, there should be ways for Alberta to provide pathways to permanent residency. So there are actually two messages in what she said. Message number one, Canada cannot treat a temporary immigration document as an automatic promise of permanent residence. Message number two, There may be a legitimate policy question about whether people with neither skills should have better pathways to stay. And I think both points deserve discussion. Now, at this junction, I just want to let you know that whatever I am saying is based on my personal opinion. I am not a legal advisor, neither am I a registered immigration consultant. If you have any questions about immigration laws, please do link up with a registered immigration consultant, or you can get more information by logging on to the Canadian IRCC website. That said, a Canadian visa and a Canadian permanent study permit are not the same document. Portage College itself explains this distinction. A study permit is the document that allows an international student to stay in Canada and study. A visa or temporary resident visa is generally the travel document used to enter Canada. Those two things should not be casually treated as interchangeable. And immigration status can also depend on what application a person has submitted and when they submitted it. For example, IRCC says that if a student applies to extend their study permit before it expires, they can remain in Canada while the application is processed under maintained status. So if a student permit has expired and the person did not apply in time, there can also be a restoration process in certain circumstances. IRCC says someone who loses student status may have 90 days to apply for restoration, although approval is not guaranteed. So when we hear their visa expired, so they are illegal and must immediately leave, we should be careful. The individual circumstances also matter. Their study permits, their work permits, whether they applied for something else, whether they maintained their status, whether they have another legal basis to remain, and what decision IRCC has actually made. This is why these immigration stories actually need a nuanced approach, because we're talking about people's legal status, not just headlines. Now, let's get to the heart of the story. The controversy involves graduates connected to Portage College's former partner delivered programming, particularly programs delivered through partnerships in Calgary and Edmonton. Some graduates have faced refusals of their applications for post-graduation work permits, and of course, it's commonly called the PGWPs, and this is where things become particularly important. Under current federal rules, graduating from a Canadian institution does not automatically mean that you qualify a postgraduate work permit. There are specific requirements. IRCC currently states that a person generally needs to have completed an eligible program at a postgraduate work permit eligible designated learning institution. And importantly, IRCC's current rules also say that people who completed a non-credit program of study are not eligible for a postgraduate work permit, with limited exceptions. IRCC also says that programs delivered on behalf of a postgraduate work permit eligible institution through certain curriculum licensing requirements or arrangements can be excluded from postgraduate work permit eligibility. That's significant because being able to study in Canada is one question. Being able to work in Canada after graduation is another. And being eligible for permanent residence is yet another question. So these three things are often talked about as though they are one pathway. No, they are not. Now, this is where I want to be fair to the students, because I was once a student myself. It is easy to say, why did they come here if they knew they might have to leave? That's a legitimate question. Canada has never guaranteed permanent residence to every international student. A study permit is temporary, just like a temporary resident visa. And students are responsible for understanding the conditions attached to their immigration status. I think that needs to really be said clearly. But there is another legitimate question. What information were these students given before they paid that huge tuition and got enrolled and left their countries? Because if a student was told, I believe explicitly or implicitly, that they wouldn't get a postgraduate work permit when they graduate from that college or from that program, that would have given them an opportunity to weigh their options and also be prepared for the outcome of whatever decision they may take. If they knew about this and yet, they still commit to this, then that's a completely different issue. That's no longer simply students don't want to follow the rules. It becomes where the rules properly understood by everyone involved, where the students properly informed, where the recruitment agents accurate, where the institution clearly communicates postgraduate work permit eligibility. And did the federal rules change at a point? Yes, there should be a clarification of all these questions. And if there was confusion, who should bear the consequences? Those are serious questions, and they deserve evidence rather than assumptions. Now, Portage College has responded publicly. The college says it remains available to assist graduates, with academic records, transcripts, completion letters, and other college-issued documents, just to make it clear that they are also there to help. But it also makes clear that immigration decisions are made by the federal government, not the college. And that distinction matters, because no matter what you provide, if the RFCC says, no, you do not qualify for a postgraduate work permit or permanent residence, there's really nothing the school can do. IRCC determines immigration eligibility. A college cannot guarantee a federal work permit, and a province cannot unilaterally also grant a federal immigration document. Now, let's tackle the uncomfortable question. Is Premier Danielle Smith right? Well, in one sense, yes. Canada is a country governed by immigration laws. Now, be patient. If a person's temporary status ends and they have no legal authorization or other basis to remain, they cannot simply decide they are now permanent residents. That principle is important. And frankly, immigrants should be among the people defending that principle. Why? Because immigration works where there are clear rules. I came to Canada as an immigrant, as an international student, and I understand what it means to build a life within a system where immigration status matters. We cannot tell Canadians that rules matter and then tell immigrants that rules don't matter when the situation becomes emotionally difficult. But there is another side. A government cannot enforce immigration rules and still ask whether those rules are producing fair outcomes. And that is where I think that Portage College story deserves serious attention, because there is a difference between saying you have no legal status, so you cannot remain indefinitely, and saying we don't care whether you were given misleading information or whether the system failed to communicate clearly. Those are not the same position. You can support immigrant enforcement and demand accountability from institutions. You can support temporary immigration and believe students deserve accurate information. You can believe people without legal status eventually have to leave, and believe that there should be a fair process for determining what happened. Those positions are not contradictory. Here's what I think that Canadians need to understand. For many years, Canada's international education system was presented as more than education. Students were often told about the possibility of studying, working, and graduation, and after graduation, potentially qualifying for permanent residence. But possibility is not the same as guarantee. And this distinction became extremely important as Canada's immigration system tightened. Government says the broader objective is to, reduce the temporary population to less than 5% of Canadian residents or Canada's population by the end of 2027. So we are clearly in a different immigration environment, and I think every intending international student should know that immigration laws are actually changing in Canada. So Canada is no longer saying come in as many temporary residents as the system can accommodate. The message is increasingly saying we want immigration to be sustainable and targeted toward economic and labor market needs. So Premier Danielle Smith has also been pushing for greater provincial influence over immigration selection. So the Portage College controversy is actually a much larger Canadian conversation. What should Canada's international student program look like? How many students should Canada admit? Which programs should qualify for post-graduation work permits? How closely should education programs be tied to labor market needs? How much responsibility should colleges and recruiters have? And what happens to students who entered Canada under one set of expectations but encounter a very different reality after graduation, like the Portage College graduates? And this is where I want to speak personally, because I don't believe being an immigrant means I have to automatically defend every immigrant. And I don't believe being a permanent resident and being grateful to Canada means that I should be afraid to ask difficult questions. At the same time, I don't believe every immigration problem should automatically be blamed on Canada or the immigrants. There is responsibility on all sides. Students need to do their research. Now, I'm going to place a link on a video I did before this whole issue started. I actually put it in there on how to go about securing admission. And the second link would be about the best provinces for permanent residents, especially the programs and the degrees and the kind of work you should look out for when you are applying to this course. Please do take your time to check it out. Students need to understand their immigration documents and what would happen if they finish their program in that specific school. They need to understand that permanent residence is never guaranteed simply because you studied in Canada. But institutions also have great responsibilities. Recruiters have responsibilities. Governments also have responsibility. And when thousands of dollars and years of people's lives are involved, information needs to be accurate. That's the standard I would want if I were advising another person considering international education in Canada. Please do not sell Canada as a guaranteed immigration pathway. Canada is an opportunity. It is not a guarantee. And anyone selling a Canadian education should be crystal clear about that. So, what should happen now? First, I believe that the individual cases need to be assessed individually. Not everyone connected to this Portage College necessarily has the same immigration story or immigration history, the same program, the same documents, or the same status. Second, I think that students should get accurate information from qualified immigration professionals rather than relying on social media, like relying on TikTok, Facebook comments, YouTube comments, or recruitment agents alone. Third, if students were genuinely misled about the immigration consequences of a program, that should be investigated. And if institutions or recruiters made inaccurate representations, there should be accountability. 4, governments should communicate policy changes clearly, because immigration policy isn't just paperwork. Behind every application is a person. Behind every person is a family. Money, I mean huge money. That's a whole lot of money. Behind every application are years of hard work. Sometimes a mortgage, sometimes children, sometimes an entire future built around a decision. That doesn't mean that every person has a right to remain in Canada, but it does mean that how we administer the system matters. So in closing, as Premiere Danielle Smith's go home comment has created a lot of emotion, I think the real conversation is bigger than one sentence. Yes, temporary immigration is temporary. Yes, people need legal status, of course, to remain in Canada. Yes, permanent residence is not guaranteed, but we should also ask whether Canada's international education system has always communicated those realities clearly enough. And we should ask whether students who genuinely relied on information provided by institutions or recruiters deserve a fair examination of their individual circumstances. That is the balanced conversation. Not immigrants are the problem and not the government is always wrong, Canadians are the problem. No. Instead, we should ask what happened, who was responsible, what do the rules actually say, and what should a fair solution look like. I am more inclined to get a solution in every issue. So if you're an international student or a former international student like me, if you're an immigrant, you're a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, or simply someone interested in the Canada's immigration system, I genuinely like to hear your perspective. Do you agree with the Alberta's Premiere Danielle Smith that people whose temporary status expires should leave Canada? Or do you believe that Canada also has a responsibility to examine whether some students were given misleading information or expectations, as the case may be, about their postgraduate work permit? Let's have that honest conversation respectfully in the comments. And if you appreciate immigration news that doesn't simply tell you what side to take, but actually explains the story and gives you better information, especially on what next to do, please subscribe to my channel. Like and share this video. I am committed to bringing you the facts, the context, and the human side of all stories. My name is MJ, and this is the OI Show. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.